He didn't look like a killer. He was educated, polite, calm, but behind that quiet exterior was one of the most dangerous predators South America has ever known. This is the chilling case of Daniel Camargo Barbosa, a man who confessed to over 180 murders of young girls in Colombia and Ecuador between the 1970s and 1980s. He escaped prison, he crossed borders, and for years he hunted children in silence. Let's take a closer look at one of the deadliest serial killers you've never heard of. Daniel Camargo was born in 1930 in Colombia. His mother died when he was still a child, and his father quickly remarried a cruel stepmother who was abusive and controlling. He was forced to wear girls' clothes as punishment, ridiculed, and kept isolated. Camargo would later describe his childhood as a time of humiliation and rage. Despite his troubled home life, he was intelligent and performed well in school. He spoke articulately and was seen by many as gentle, but inside something was growing darker. By the early 1970s, Camargo was married and living a seemingly normal life. But underneath, he harbored twisted desires. In 1974, Colombian authorities arrested him for the rape and murder of a young girl. He was convicted of multiple assaults and sentenced to 25 years in Bogotá's Gorgona Island prison, considered escape-proof. But they underestimated him. In 1984, Camargo escaped, fleeing Colombia for Ecuador under a false identity. What followed was one of the worst killing sprees in Latin American history. In Ecuador, Camargo exploited his new anonymity. He posed as a lost traveler, a kind man offering gifts or money in exchange for help finding a fake address. He targeted girls between 9 and 12 years old, often from poor, rural areas. He would lure them into forests or isolated spots, assault them, and then murder them, usually by strangulation or bludgeoning. He didn't use weapons, didn't leave evidence, and always moved to a new town after each crime. By the time police noticed a pattern, dozens of girls were already dead. Camargo's method was methodical. Gain the trust of a young girl, lure her to a remote location, assault and kill, disappear before the body was found. He left behind minimal forensic evidence, and most of his victims came from communities where police resources were scarce. Many families believed their daughters had simply run away. Others had no answers at all. Camargo later admitted he felt no remorse, claiming he was punishing girls for the betrayal he felt from women earlier in life. On February 25, 1986, a young girl's body was discovered in Guayaquil, Ecuador. The next day, Camargo was caught walking nearby with blood on his clothes and a sack of children's clothes. He was arrested immediately. In custody, Camargo was unusually calm. He didn't resist. Instead, he began talking. Camargo confessed to killing at least 72 girls in Ecuador alone, but claimed his true count was over 180 victims, including those in Colombia. Investigators were stunned by his clarity. He remembered locations, victim ages, even the clothing they wore. His lack of emotion during the confessions was chilling. One officer described the interrogation as listening to a man talk about the weather. In 1989, Daniel Camargo Barbosa was convicted of 72 murders in Ecuador and sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed under Ecuadorian law at the time. Yes, only 16 years for dozens of murdered children. Families were devastated. Activists called for changes in sentencing laws, but Camargo remained locked away in the literal penitentiary in Guayaquil. He would never leave alive. On November 13, 1994, Camargo was murdered in prison by a fellow inmate named Giovanni Noguera, who had ties to one of the victims' families. He was stabbed 25 times. For many, it was the only justice they ever saw. Camargo was able to kill for so long because of a combination of failures: weak coordination between Colombian and Ecuadorian law enforcement, lack of forensic technology, and a society that ignored the disappearance of poor rural girls. He knew this, and he used it. Camargo once told police, "No one checks when poor girls go missing, they just forget." That statement still echoes today. Daniel Camargo Barbosa is a name that should never be forgotten, not for who he was, but for what he did. His victims were silenced not just by him, but by the system that let him move unseen. They deserved more, and they still deserve justice, even if it's only through memory. If this story impacted you, share it, so these lives aren't lost to history. We tell these stories not to glorify monsters, but to remember victims and understand how these crimes happened. Subscribe for daily true crime documentaries, and comment below, how can justice systems better protect the forgotten?